begins to spread, we could end up with a strain that is just resistant to the vaccines, that the vaccines won't protect us against?
Well, good morning, Chris. I am concerned about the arrival of the variants in the United States. Certainly, it's something that we all need to be taking very seriously. I think at this point, the good news is that the vaccines that we have appear to be still very effective against this vaccine, and the companies and our government scientists are looking very closely at it and are developing the possibility of boosters that would more tightly address this new variant if we need to go in that direction. But I think it's a message to all Americans that what happens elsewhere in the world can affect us, and that we need to do everything we can to control this pandemic. This virus is going to continue to mutate as long as it's allowed to thrive in the world, and we need to do what we can to contain it.
And just give us a sense, because as it mutates, what are the chances that we end up with a variant that is totally resistant to the vaccine?
So it's difficult to make estimates of the probability of that happening, but what we're seeing is that in the South African variant, the variant that was first found in South Africa, that at least in mild to moderate disease, some of the vaccine studies are showing diminished effectiveness. It looks like we still have enough cushion with the vaccines that they will still be very effective at this point, but it's a message that's saying that this virus is evolving and could continue to evolve in ways that make it more dangerous, either more transmissible or more lethal. And so it's important, again, for us to really do what we can to try and contain this virus, wear masks, avoid social gatherings, decrease social interaction until we get this under control. And certainly, if you have a chance to get vaccinated, if you're eligible for vaccine, you should get vaccinated in the larger effort to control this virus.
Well, let's talk about vaccine. Johnson & Johnson has announced that it has a single-dose vaccine and that it may apply for emergency approval from the FDA as soon as this week. The kicker is that it says that the efficacy rate is 72% for its J&J vaccine, as opposed to Pfizer and Moderna, which have an efficacy rate of 94 to 95%. I guess the question is, if you had a choice, and I'm not sure you will, but if you had a choice, why would you take the 72% vaccine rather than the 94 or 5% vaccine?
Well, first of all, I think this is an amazing development to have a third vaccine that is highly effective against this virus. So I think it's very welcome news for the world and for the U.S. I think the vaccine studies were set up in a different way. The Moderna-Pfizer vaccine studies happened before we had the variants circulating widely in the world. And the J&J vaccine study looked at disease endpoints that went out a bit further, at least or have been reported further out. And we see that in mild and moderate disease, the J&J vaccine was, as you say, 72%. But as you go further out in time, you see that after 28 days, it's 85% protective against all strains. And there were no cases of severe disease or death after 49 days after vaccination. We need to see more about the J&J vaccines. We've only seen the press release. The FDA needs to review it, see the details. But I think it's promising early information, and I'm hopeful that we'll see it as a very effective vaccine as part of our overall strategy.
You were, I think it's fair to say, pretty critical of the Trump administration's handling of this whole pandemic. Now that Joe Biden is in charge, what are you most encouraged by in the way he's handling the whole COVID issue? And are there some areas of the way that his new administration is handling this that still give you concern?
So I think, first of all, we're only about 10 days into this, so it's difficult to say. But what I'm seeing in the first 10 days is really encouraging to me. I think we've seen a very substantial and detailed strategy around vaccination that's been released. FEMA has been giving out money to states for the vaccination program. New rules were passed to allow doctors and nurses who are retired to vaccinate as part of the program. We're seeing increased rates of vaccination. So if you look back 2 weeks ago, about 700 to 800,000 doses a day were being given out. Now we're up to 1.2 to 1.3 million doses a day. We have some forecasting over the next 3 weeks that we'll have more vaccine available, 16% more vaccine available in the next few weeks. So overall, I'm very encouraged.
And it's a
by
federal offense
what I see.
now
I
to
see
not wear a
scientists
mask on
now,
public
they're promising
transportation,
3 days a
including
week.
Uber.
Press conference from CDC director and the NIH director and others
Right.
involved. So I think what we're seeing is very encouraging.
Aw.
One of the biggest issues, I think it's fair to say, is schools. And there are a number of school districts around the country that still haven't gone back to in-person learning. What is the science, Doctor? Are kids safer in school or outside in the community? And what about the teachers and their teacher unions around the country that are refusing to go back to in-person teaching?
So I think the science is showing that if schools have very strong mitigation procedures in place, if they've reduced the density within the school, and they're taking all of those measures very seriously, then schools can operate safely as long as the community prevalence of the disease around them is not overwhelming. And so that's really encouraging news. But what we see is that schools that have resources can put those things in place. Now, many schools in the country have not been able to put those things into place.
Children are
so that
super
would make them
spreaders.
a less safe environment for both the students and the teachers.
There is
So what we need to do is bring up all
White people on
schools
that.
to a certain level of capability so that they can mitigate the risks. They can have good ventilation for kids and for teachers.
Well, that's
They
going to happen
can
overnight.
de-densify the classroom so that kids can operate, can be there more safely, and teachers can operate more safely. I think it's very
We've got dead
encouraging that
teachers, we've got
teachers
dead
are
spouses
in
and
the front of the
teachers.
line to get vaccinated, and I hope that teachers around the country are able to get vaccinated in the coming days if they haven't been already.
they
That'll
put athletes
really
and
help
movie
reduce the
stars
risk
first.
to the adult population in schools. But I do think there's a lot of work to do in a lot of schools that do not have the things that the better prepared schools now have in place. So I think that's the challenge for us now, bringing schools around the country up to that level of capability to make it safer.
Dr. Inglesby, thank you. Thanks for coming in today. It's always good to talk with you, sir.